Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Conscious Grief series. I am welcoming my lovely friend, Susan Hannifin-MacNab, back to the second series. Susan is a social worker, an educator, and author of the amazing A to Z Healing Toolbox, which is a practical guide for navigating grief and trauma with intention. Welcome back, Susan.
So great to be here. I love hanging out with you, Tara. Who knew that talking about grief and trauma work could be actually enjoyable? But it's enjoyable when I hang out with you and do these series.
Well, thank you. I couldn't agree more. So I'm so delighted to have you back and talk about your grief, which is personal to you, because for people who didn't watch our first conversation, you were widowed at the young age of 41 years old. Correct. So would you be open to telling us about dear Brent and what happened?
I would love to. I talk about Brent whenever I can. So I was with Brent for 17 years. He was my guy. We met when I was 24, and he was a professor of international business. So we had some amazing adventures. We lived in Canada, we lived in Australia, we lived in Hawaii, and he was a surfer, and we kayaked together and did all the things. Our son was born in Australia. And marriage is, of course, is never perfect, but ours was pretty great. And we were coming back to the U.S. after we had lived in Australia for a while. And he was here for a month in the local area where I am now in San Diego. And he died in a car accident very suddenly. And in the book, I write about grief and trauma, because the grief, of course, is my husband's not here anymore. How do I live with this? But there was a trauma piece because he was missing for 2 weeks before they found the vehicle. So there was 2 weeks of missing person, missing in action. What do you do with that? And so when I decided to eventually write the book, and that's a story in itself, I wanted to include trauma as well as grief. And so that's the quick version of I became widowed suddenly at 41. Our son was 5 years old, and I had been back in the country a month. And where do you start from there with a dead husband, a traumatized self, a grieving child, no job, no car, no home? I mean, starting from ground zero.
Wow. Yeah, truly ground zero. So much there to navigate, Susan. So what did you do? Like, how was that?
Right. I know. What do you do with that? Well, it was a hot mess. I was a hot mess for a long time. And because I was already a social worker and I was already an educator of young kids, I think about my friend Tom Zuba, who wrote the foreword to my book, and he says, life prepares us for life. And I believe that I was already a social worker and already an educator for a reason. And so I eventually took the skills as a social worker that I used for everyone else, connecting everyone else with resources in the community and helping children. And I combined those, and I started social working my life and my child's life, and really ran after every resource, every therapist, every healing modality that was available to me and us here in San Diego, where I live. And on my shelf here behind me, you see a bunch of binders, and one of those binders was the original A to Z Healing Toolbox. And I just started collecting, information, hard copy information, and putting it into a binder. And then because I was a teacher, it had to be alphabetized, right? So A, animals, animal therapy. Why is that animal in the therapist office helping me calm down? Why is my son calmer when he's in therapy with a therapy dog? Let's look at that. So that became letter A. Letter B was breath work. I can't breathe anymore. help me, help me, help me, and looking around the community for people who could help me with that. Letter C, of course, it was counseling. Let me run after all the different types of counseling and therapy. So that became the first A to Z or A to Z binder, which eventually became a book. Over time, of course, because here I am 9 years later, and that was then. And so there's a huge period, and I'm still healing, but I do talk to people about, this is me now, and that was me then. And there's been enormous growth, healing, change, grief, trauma, healing, change, this whole way. I didn't just appear this, joyful person again. It's taken a ton of work.
Mm-hmm. And yes, like you say, it's nine whole years. And sometimes that probably feels like a long 9 years, and sometimes it probably feels like yesterday.
Yes. Time becomes surreal, at least in my life, and I lose track of time. How I track time is really, what grade is my son in now? So he started kindergarten at age 5, right after his dad died, and he's now a freshman in high school. He's 14. And that is how I know time is moving on. Otherwise, it's kind of like this surrealness, right? We expect our people to be here with us physically forever. And when that doesn't happen, time becomes bizarre, at least for me and all the widowed people and all the bereaved parents that I work with. It just becomes different.
Yeah. And you, as you just shared, you work with bereaved people. So you were a social worker, and then you became a widow. You wrote this book packed full of information to help people navigate grief and trauma. And then now you work for Soaring Spirits. So I'd love for you to share about Soaring Spirits.
I'd love to talk about the transition, or actually the integration, right? How did I get from here to here? How does anyone get from ground zero, not able to even move or brush their teeth all day long, to writing a book and working for a nonprofit and doing conscious grief summits? I was invited to a conference the year after Brent died by another widowed person. And she said, look, I'm going to this conference called Camp Widow. Do you want to come with me? And I said, absolutely not. That sounds awful. Like, number one, I don't want to be a widow. Number two, what do you talk about? Like, I don't want to cry more. I'm already crying every day. But turns out I went because I was grabbing everything I could to figure out how to help myself and my child. And it was the greatest place I never wanted to be. So Camp Widow is one of the programs run by Soaring Spirits International, which is a global widowed community. And Soaring Spirits serves the global widowed community with 3-day conferences called Camp Widow in Toronto, San Diego, and Tampa every year. We've had some virtual conferences. We have regional social groups that meet twice a month all over North America, and two groups in Europe now as well. We have Widowed Village, which is an online platform. So there's so many ways to get involved if you are a widowed person, ways to get involved with Soaring Spirits. So after my first Camp Widow, I started presenting different workshops at Camp Widow, and eventually I became their programs and education manager, which is what I do now. And then the other part of what I do now is I work running solo sessions and small groups with widowed people and bereaved parents. So it's kind of an integration of my work as a social worker that I was doing before Brent died, but I really swung into grief and trauma healing work with bereaved families and bereaved individuals. So that's it in a nutshell.
Mm-hmm. And it's very interesting that this has become like your life's work now. who knows if it's forever, nothing's forever, but that this circumstance of losing your husband has brought you into this work, supporting others. And I remember we talked last time about post-traumatic growth. I think it's such an interesting concept. So perhaps you could share again about that, because you are a real example of that.
Right. Well, thank you. The beautiful thing about this work is I see so many other people who are moving into the 5 pillars of post-traumatic growth. And a brief synopsis of post-traumatic growth is that I was, as I mentioned, looking around for resources everywhere and anywhere to help myself and my son. And I stumbled upon some research out of University of North Carolina. And these 2 researchers were working with a large group of bereaved parents over a 10-year period of time. And they started to see that there were 5 basic pillars or 5 growth areas that these folks were moving toward. And they thought it was incredibly amazing, because how could these parents whose children have died move into reaching a hand back and helping others and starting foundations and really just growing out of that grief? So the 5 pillars of post-traumatic growth, I like to think of them in an oasis. So it's OASIS. The O stands for opportunities. New opportunities may have come out of this experience. So for me, the experience of Brent dying has given me incredible opportunities to meet wonderful people like you, to meet other authors, to meet other people who are doing the work of grief and healing and trauma work, so that people can feel better. So that's O, new opportunities. Letter A is appreciation. Just general appreciation for life. These bereaved parents had been at ground zero. And then over time, they started appreciating each other more. The butterflies in the sky, their living children, the sunshine. I mean, everything just kind of became more appreciative, because they knew that nothing was going to last forever. So that's pillar 2. Pillar 3 is S, which is, there are 2 S's. The first one is strength, inner strength. I've been through this. I can do anything. I can start a nonprofit. I can do a conscious grief summit. I can write a book. I can reach a hand back and help others. So that S is inner strength. Then the I in Oasis is interpersonal relationships, which isn't to say all of our interpersonal relationships get stronger, but many do with total strangers. For instance, you and I have become good friends. How did that happen? Well, because we each had grief and trauma experiences and have moved into post-traumatic growth. So that letter I is interpersonal relationships can be strengthened. And for folks listening to this call, if you maybe take a moment and think about, is it a sister? Is it a neighbor? Is it a colleague? Like, who's come into your life that has maybe not been there for you as much in the past, but they really have become a person that is there for you now, and that's a stronger bond. And then finally, the last pillar is S again, which is spirituality. And for many people that move into the post-traumatic growth zone, spirituality can strengthen. Now, this could be a spiritual sense that is different from your former sense or your former self. It doesn't have to be the same. And my example would be, I grew up Catholic and very involved in running retreats and singing in the choir. And then Brent died, and none of that made sense. And I threw it all away, and I hated God, and I had to rebuild my faith. And so now that church and that structure does not fit into my life, but I feel very close to Brent now, and I have a different relationship with God that is much stronger, and it's different. And so that's all wrapped up with post-traumatic growth.
Yeah, it's so interesting. It's such a great acronym. And I was thinking about some of the feedback I had after the other Conscious Grief series. Some people said that they wanted like more sort of practical tools for dealing with your grief. And I was like, oh, they must have missed Susan's interview, because, you know, you have written this book with all these tools in it, which is quite unique, actually, looking at other grief books that are out there. And there's, it's packed full of practical things that people can do to hopefully get to that post-traumatic growth area. I wanted to talk about a couple of them, because one of them was nutrition, because I know that some people, and myself included, really use food as one of my go-tos to just, you know, feel better, ease the pain, but then it becomes this really kind of vicious cycle that food becomes this enemy and it should be a nutritious thing. And so it'd be interesting to hear how your relationship was.
Oh, such a great topic. And it's a challenging topic too, grief and food. I'll start by just saying that it's very normal for people to use a variety of coping tools when they're grieving, especially in the early days. And I heard an acronym. I love acronyms, by the way, because I think they're practical and they help us understand things. So there's a book called The Grief Recovery Method, and they talk about STERBs, 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 and that stands for short-term energy releasing behaviors. Short-term energy releasing behaviors. These are behaviors that are going to help our grief, our anxiety, our craziness initially, but long-term, they're not going to help us. So I took this class, the Grief Recovery Method class, and I was instructed to, or invited to, write down what my STERBs were. And then we shared them as a class. And some short-term energy releasing behaviors have to do with food. So eating, drinking alcohol, sex, shopping, maybe staying on social media for hours and hours and hours, exercise for some people, anything where you can release some of that anxiety, frustration, anger, sadness, all of that. And for many women, especially, food becomes the number one STERB, right? Short-term energy releasing behavior. For many people, many women, I'll talk about now, there's already a food thing going on before our person died. And so maybe that's what we grab onto initially, because food can help us feel better, right? Wine, chocolate, whatever it is. And so just, I'm mentioning this first just so that people know it's completely normal to use something like food to help soothe ourselves. One of my good friends and peer mentors gained 40 pounds after her husband died because she was so sad and so lonely. And every night she sat on the couch watching TV with a pint of Ben & Jerry's ice cream. And that was her company. And so she did that for a year or two. And 4 years later, she saw herself in a photo and said, "Who is that? I have gained 40 pounds, courtesy of my friends, Ben and Jerry." And so then she had to get some other tools, right, to help her rebalance. But as far as practically, what can we do when food or alcohol or something becomes our STERB? Food-wise, there's some tricks that I've used in the kitchen and I still do. Number one is having a visual reminder. So this is a visual reminder, and it's out all the time, my San Diego camper van cup, to drink water. It's not a wine glass. It's not a coffee cup. It's my water cup, and it's out all the time. So having a visual reminder of things that are healthy for us to consume during our grief. It could be having fruit in the fruit bowl that you can see out. It could be having this is my water jug or my water cup, but other people have a big thermos that they keep full with water on their countertop. Reorganizing the refrigerator. So what I did, and 9 years later, I've still done this, all of the bread stuff is in the vegetable drawer. It's out of sight. All the vegetables are out so that when I open the refrigerator, that's what I see. I see fruit and I see vegetables right away. I don't see them. They're hidden in the drawers down there, right?
Good idea. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a little reorganizing that you can do of your refrigerator. Another tool that folks use, not just in grief, but in weight loss, is a food journal. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of research on the value of writing things down, whether it's your goals for your profession or you're writing things down for your children or yourself. Writing down what you're eating is a visual of, okay, like, what have I had today? I've had a huge chocolate bar all day long. Okay, note to self, maybe I can still have some chocolate tomorrow, but maybe I can add also a banana. I'm not saying, we're going to be perfect, because I will tell you, in my food journey, initially it was, I can't eat it all. And that was for a year. I was shocked. I was grief, trauma land. And my reaction to that was I was nauseous, physically nauseous. So I'm 5'9" and I weigh about 140. And I've always weighed that. And I've always been this height since I was 12 years old. I lost 10 pounds. I didn't have weight to lose, and I couldn't eat. So for me, it was not chocolate. It was, I wanted nothing. And so it was leaving something out that I could stomach, crackers and a banana or some applesauce, or just something that was easy on the stomach, but it would remind me to eat. But that's back to the food journal. The second year and third year, my appetite came back a little bit more, but then I'm exhausted still, and I have a child to feed. I don't even care what I'm eating. So if someone said to me, well, how can I help? Restaurant gift cards. So we were going out a lot. We were going out, burgers, fries, whatever it was wonderful because I didn't have to think about it or cook it. And then, of course, burgers and fries, that's not real good for your energy level, much less, your heart. But at least for me, it was like, it's something.
Yeah.
But then I had to switch out of that as well. So one year, my parents said, what would you like for Christmas? We can't bring Brent back. What would help you practically? And I said, well, I've heard that there are these companies that actually deliver healthy meals. And Blue Apron, I mean, there's some all over the world. But so I said, I would like that. So I got meals for 3 months. It was just dinner. Mm-hmm. And this car drove through our neighborhood and it dropped off at my doorstep 2 healthy meals every night. And it kind of gave me a break, and it gave me a visual of, okay, this is what healthy looks like. Mm. Okay, because we forget, right? We're not thinking about food or food health or physical health when we're just trying to get out of bed. Mm-hmm. So those are some practical tools, and visuals are huge, because the way to change a habit is, right, visual reminders, maybe auditory reminders. Set a timer. Ding. Have I had that water today? Ding. Okay, it's time for me to eat lunch. Even if you're not hungry, have something. Mm-hmm. So visual reminders and auditory reminders are wonderful as a start. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, in the book, there are 6 different reminders as well for people just to think about integrating single small steps. Mm-hmm. And that's what I believe the work of grief and trauma healing is about. It's not, one day you're way over there and you're fixed, you're cured, you're done. It's these baby steps. Oh, today I actually had half a chocolate bar instead of the whole thing, or I actually ate a banana instead of eating nothing, or, they're baby steps. And sometimes we'll take 3 steps ahead and then go 2 steps back. But the book is just full of suggestions, really. Like, here's a suggestion for you. How does that feel? Does that feel like something that's possible? If it's not, turn the page. There's something else.
Yeah, it's so true. And yeah, I would just say to people as well, from the years that I really kind of had a lot of struggle around food, and I was so kind of wishing that it would be different and it wouldn't be that I have control, and when I didn't have control, and eventually I got there. And like you were saying, it's small steps, and sometimes we just don't go at the speed we want to. But I think if I had something to say to my younger self, I remember actually having a session with a healer type lady on the phone. I never met her. And she just said, maybe your body needs this right now. Maybe your body actually needs this sugar and things, because, I was feeling so bad. And it was almost like, I don't know, it was almost like that sugar was like the only sort of sweetness that I felt that I had in my life at that time. Yes. So sometimes when I hear somebody really struggling and then beating themselves up for the binging, and which I completely understand, and it's not a nice feeling and you don't feel good, but just to go back to just sort of telling yourself, being compassionate with yourself as opposed to being mean and berating yourself because you're in something so hard. And
yes,
just be confident.
Yes, exactly. And knowing that, there's a whole chapter in the Grief Recovery Method book about STIRBs, right?
Right.
It's a real thing, short-term energy releasing behaviors. And those can go on for however long they go on, because we know grief is correlated to love. And if we love our person, I still love Brent 9 years later, I'm going to have some energy releasing behaviors that it's more about being aware of them. It's not about judging ourselves because they're there, mm-hmm. or extinguishing all of them in one day. We're human. Mm-hmm. So I think normalizing and talking about all this stuff is so important, so that folks know, oh, it's not just me. Like, I'm not the only one sitting on my couch eating, 40 pounds worth of ice cream, right? It's normal.
It's normal. Exactly. It's normal. And one of the other things that I was enjoying in the book about, the people in our lives who we surround ourselves, who are our friends. And, there are going to be some people who are more compassionate or helpful than others. And there might be the people that tell you to move on, or don't eat this, don't eat that, or, things like that. Oh, so yeah. Would you be willing to share a little bit about your categorization of people?
I would. I love this topic because we change. when our person dies, and our relationships change because we've changed. So for instance, I have a friend whose children have died, and they would be in their 30s now. And she said to me the other day, I mean, her children died 30 years ago. She said, if I hear one more story from a grandparent, I'm just going to like shut myself in the room for the day. It's so hard for her 30 years later to be surrounded all the time by other grandparents, because she's not a grandparent and she won't have that opportunity anymore. So that's just a small example of how things change socially. I know for the widowed people I work with, we were a couple, suddenly we're a single. Okay, well, a lot of my couple friends don't ask me to come to things anymore because I'm the odd one out. So now I'm looking for other single people to hang out with. So things shift and change. And for me, I got really real with people who weren't helping me. And I also got really real with people who were helping me, but in ways that I didn't necessarily need or want, but they were still valuable. So one day I had a woman come over. She was called a Stevens minister, and I write about this in the book. She was part of a church team that came over to homes where there was a crisis. And I had only been involved with this church for 2 seconds, but they sent somebody over, and this woman sat on my couch, and I was like, yeah, what are you going to do for me? My life is a total mess. And she said, I am here to be with you. I'm not here to do your laundry or drive your son anywhere or make meals. Other people can do those things. I'm here to be with you. And whatever you're feeling, whatever emotion, I'm just here to be. And I thought, like, immediately, and my brain was like, do, 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 do. And I came up with these columns in my head, because I'm a linear thinker like that. Oh, I get it. Some of the people in my life are the beers. They can just be with me. They can sit in the pain. They can sit in the sorrow. They can handle my anger, my frustration, my loneliness. Oh, they're the beers. Okay. Well, then the people who are going to help me with my laundry and drive my son and cook me a meal. Oh, they're the doers. That's my mom. My mom is like the ultimate doer. She's like a ball of energy running around. What can I do to help you? Not how can I be to help you? She says, what can I do to help you? Mm-hmm. So she became in that category in my brain. And then these other folks who were, oh, you're young. You'll find someone else again soon. Oh, it's going to be fine. I lost my cat and I totally know how you feel. Or, all of that unhelpful stuff, they became I put them on the shelf. Mm-hmm. And I pictured in my head a huge shelf like this with a bunch of little holes. And if you have an IKEA, right, for IKEA, the company IKEA sells these shelves with like all the squares, like 15 different squares. And I was putting people mentally in the squares of my IKEA shelf. Like, you're on the shelf. You're not helping me. I will revisit you later, but for now, you're there. And in the book, there's a page in the book that I will show you right here with paper. Basically, if you have the book, you can turn to page O or chapter O, organizing your supports. But if you don't, you can simply take a piece of paper. I folded it into 3 sections. Yes, that's it. So one of the sections, says beers, then the doers, then the shelfers. And there's a column there, right? So Tara's holding it up. So start putting your people in the beers. Yeah. Who are the people in your life who can just be with you? They make you feel good just by their presence. They don't even have to say anything. Next column, who are some of the people that can do things for you? Can they cut your lawn? they might not even know what you need, and you might not know, but when you think of something, you can write them on the list and ask them, because people want to help. They just don't know how, or they don't know if they're intruding. So they can cut your grass, they can drive your kid, they can, bring you to the hairdresser, they can come do your nails, they can, what do you have to do in your home, right? What needs doing? They can do it. I had a friend bring over for Christmas a huge cooler with a huge red bow on it. And I was like, was she giving me a cooler for Christmas? What is happening? I opened the cooler. She had cooked gourmet meals, put them in freezer bags, and stacked them all in this cooler. And so I had meals for months.
Wow.
It was amazing. Talk about a doer,
wow.
right? Yeah. And so if people know you need something, right? Or if you know they have a skill set, put them in that column. I wanted my mom to be with me. I wanted her to be. She couldn't handle the pain. She didn't know what to do, but she could do, right? She could do stuff. She just couldn't do the pain the way I needed someone else to. So I put her in the doer column, and now she's still doing stuff for me. I had a plumbing issue yesterday where water's all over the floor and the drain is clogged. And she came up, brought all these towels, clean towels, took my old wet ones away, took my wet towels home to wash them, and she's bringing them back today. So these doer people love to do stuff. And then the third column is the shelfers. And this is a tricky situation. I actually do workshops called Navigating Social Change. And it's about, this relationship doesn't feel good anymore. This person doesn't feel good anymore. I'm putting them on the shelf. Well, do I leave them there forever? Do I take them down? Like, how do I manage that? And so that's a whole conversation and a whole weekend right there. But I will say the beauty of the shelf is you can take things off, hold it, try it. If it doesn't feel good, put it back on. I did this with a friend for years. She was a friend for 25 years. She knew my husband well. And when he died, she was more hysterical than I was. Well, I can't handle your hysteria. You're supposed to be helping me. And it was this constant, she was so stressed out about the situation. I don't have the energy to help you. This is crazy. So I put her on the shelf. 6 months later, we went out for lunch. It was still more anxiety of her. I put her back on the shelf. 6 months later, tried it again, went for a walk on the beach. It was still the same. And I realized over time, she's still the same person. I've changed. I don't want that in my life. I can't handle that anxiety in my life. I shouldn't be the one supporting you all the time. And interesting, that's how it always was. And I don't want that anymore. It doesn't fit. And so I always say to people, the shelf is a great place to have people rest. And you can tell them. I sent out a mass email and I said, thank you all for trying to support me. I'm in a place right now where I need to really go in. I will let you know when I'm ready to come out. And then the people who got it, right, they came on when I was ready to have people do things for me and be there for me. And the other people stayed on the shelf. And I will say that some of them are still there. And I have learned to be okay with that because they're not a part of my current life, but they were an integral part of my past life. And that's hard. It's a hard place to come to because we've already lost so much with our person dying. Mm-hmm. And then often people say to me, but it's more loss. It's more loss. It's more loss. And the truth is, as we both know, Tara, there are so many secondary losses. When parents die, hello, you took my history with you. When a spouse dies, hello, like you're my bed buddy, like just that. When a child dies, that I won't be a grandparent. So there's so many secondary layers, and one of the layers, unfortunately, is that, unfortunately or fortunately, other relationships change, and I had to come to a place of being okay with that, because this is my authentic self and authentic life now, and those people aren't working in it.
Yeah, thank you so much. I love the idea of this workshop. Yeah, even if you're not in grief, it seems like an interesting workshop to do.
Yes, navigating social change. It's a huge topic. You're right. Not just, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And I always say, so I work with small groups virtually from all over the world. And I have had one small group of women who we've met every week now for almost a year, and they're lovely. And we always talk about what's good for your soul. So I have 3 questions or 3 prompts for people, and I'll share them with everyone here. The first one is, whatever is good for your soul, do that. If you think about whatever is good for your soul, do that. The second one is, whoever is good for your soul, spend time with them. Whoever is good for your soul, you're going to know if they're not good for your soul. Don't spend time with them. Right? Spend time with the people who are good for your soul. And then the third is, wherever is good for your soul, go there. Spend time in places that make you feel good, whether that's the swimming pool, it's an outside nature walk, it's a yoga class, wherever it is, if it's a house on the lake that you've had since you were young, like wherever is good for your soul, whoever is good for your soul, and whatever is good for your soul, do that.
I think that's great advice for everyone. Yeah, I love that. Lastly, Susan, I wanted to ask you, and it's probably kind of a long question to ask you, but
that's okay.
Being a widow, obviously there's probably a lot of people who ask about like, when is a good time to start dating, or maybe you never want to meet somebody else. Like, even for me, I'm just going through a breakup right now. And when my sister was sort of hurrying me along to meet somebody else, I honestly felt kind of like insulted by that, because I was like, I really love my husband. It's just not going to work out. And it wasn't a case of like, I just want to get on and meet someone else. So goodness knows how, it must be when somebody asks you that with somebody that you are deeply happy with. Would you speak to that a little bit as our last question?
Yes, definitely. So the first thing I always say, to anyone in grief is that there's no timeline, absolutely no timeline, whether it's a grief from death, grief from a divorce, grief from a job loss, grief from moving, whatever the grief is about, there is absolutely no timeline. So how can we expect a healing timeline, right? When there's no timeline for how long we're going to love this person. There's no timeline for how long we're going to grieve this person or that relationship or that job or that place. So I always preface by saying that. And then I always think about what is the real, true reason why people are asking me that question. many times with good friends, it's just, how are you doing with it all? Mm. But with other folks who want to rush me along, it's because they are so uncomfortable. Like, they're so uncomfortable with my singleness now that if only I would repartner, you'd be good. Like, I'd be all good. Right? No, it's their stuff. Like, they're putting their stuff onto me or onto you or onto them. So in my own dating story, right, this is 9 years later, it took me a good 2.5 years to just stop feeling absolutely sick to my stomach anytime someone brought that up. Do you think you'll date again? I mean, it made me literally want to just be sick. Mm-hmm. This was the only guy I'd ever been with. In all the different ways. I met him when I was 24. He was it. He was my guy. And so, like, it wasn't even how dare you ask me that. It was just that makes me really ill. And then at about 3 years later, it was around New Year's, and I came to this aha moment of, okay, well, I can either wait for Brent to come back. I don't think that's going to happen. I can just say to myself, I'm going to do this on my own now for the rest of time, my time here, however long that will be. Even though I signed up to be in a long-term monogamous marriage, or I can figure out how to date in my 40s with a child and being a widow. And so I opted for door 3, which was trying to figure this out in my 40s with a child. And I have to say, I'm still figuring it out. But I have friends who, I have so many stories of people who are in the widowed community that, started dating a year later, a month later, 10 years later, never. I mean, it's all over the map because we're all different people. And there's no timeline, mm-hmm. right? So I always say it's really, right. It's our life. It's our time. It's our choice to heal in the way that we're going to at the rate we're going. And if we want to invite other people in, whether they're romantic partners or friendships or colleagues, that's up to us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And like you were saying with the 3 questions to ask yourself, just checking in with what feels right for your soul and not caring about what feels right for everybody else.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's, whatever's good for my soul, mm-hmm. Whoever is good for my soul and wherever is good for my soul, not your soul, like, right? We're different. So whatever is good for me may be different. And especially, I have a friend who talks about living in the fishbowl after a person dies. Like, we're in the fishbowl and we're the fish, and everybody walks by and looks at the fish. Like, how you doing? How you doing, Tara? When are you going to get, everyone has an opinion about, how long the fish should swim, what's it doing on the bottom? Is it eating enough? Like, we're in the fishbowl and everyone's watching, and ultimately they can watch all they want. This is our life, and we get to make choices around that.
Oh, Susan, thank you so
much to say.
So much to say. I know, could speak for another hour, but we have to wrap up there. So I thank you so much for everything that you've shared. It's been wonderful.
You are so welcome. You're so welcome. Thanks for having me again.
Yes, I'm so glad that you're here. And thank you to everybody who has been watching. Bye-bye.
Bye.